All right. Well, good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining me tonight. Tonight we'll be chatting a little bit about optimal exercise for mitochondrial health and overall longevity. So I've usually start off this talk with this picture that you guys have seen before, but this was me a couple years ago over in Bhutan. That's the tiger's nest behind me. That's a very famous monastery built on the side of a mountain. And it's a sheer cliff to get up to the top of it. So you can see I have a hiking stick in my hand, and I was not dying at the top, but I did try to race all the colleagues who were on this expedition, and I did beat most of the people that I wanted to beat up there. So actually I had to have somebody else take my picture. The rest of my group wasn't up there yet. So tonight we'll talk a little bit about how exercise helps optimize the mitochondria. The mitochondria are the things that produce energy in your cells, and they run on oxygen. So you're exercising, you're improving oxygen flow to the mitochondria. And so I just throw up this picture. I've shown it before, but unfortunately, the first sign of sudden cardiac death often, I should say, the first sign of coronary disease or blockages in your arteries is sudden cardiac death. And if you look at both these individuals, they both had sudden cardiac death. The gentleman on the right, Tim Russert, did not make it. The gentleman on the left, the guy for The Biggest Loser, he did make his sudden cardiac death alive because he had bystander CPR and was able to get to a cath lab in time for them to fix his left anterior descending artery. But Bob Harper was extremely lucky. 9 out of 10 people who have sudden cardiac death out of the hospital do not make it. And if you look at Bob Harper, he was on The Biggest Loser. The guy looks, like a rock star. He's extremely physically fit, but his insides were not as nearly as pristine as his outside was. So that's why you may hear me frequently talk about test, don't guess. And that's why I routinely do the CT coronary calcium scan, the carotid endometrial medial thickness scan, and the endopad test to really tell you how healthy are your arteries. So exercise, I'm probably the only cardiologist who can tell you, be careful with your chronic cardio. If you love to run long distances, ultramarathons, that's a skill you develop, but it's not necessarily the healthiest thing for you to do. Because if you don't recover well, you may end up doing more damage than good. So exercise is something that stresses your body, you recover, and then your body's ready to go again the next time you stress it. So walking, which is physical activity, and everybody should be physically active every day, walking alone generally is not considered exercise because you don't put in big enough physiologic stressor on the system for your body to get better. So yes, you need to be active. Yes, you need to walk, but exercise from walking, unless you're power walking and you're a little bit short of breath or sweating, it may not be enough activity for you to actually get a physiologic benefit. All right. So this is not necessarily exercise. This is something I'm going to give a talk in a couple nights at an OsteoStrong location down off Telegraph. So if any of you are interested in seeing me talk live, we'll be talking a bit more about biohacking and health optimization at the OsteoStrong location off the Telegraph Thursday night at 6:30. But the OsteoStrong equipment is basically used to build stronger bones. Your bones are your chassis for your muscle. Your muscle is your metabolic engine, your metabolic currency. Without muscle mass, you don't tend to age well. So we're going to spend a lot of time talking about muscle mass tonight. So these machines here at OsteoStrong are designed to cause osteogenic growth that loads the bones axially. So you're compressing the bones like a straw, and that causes the bones to get thicker and stronger. So they have kind of a leg press, they have an arm press, and they have a couple other ones I haven't shown here. But if you build strong bones, you can put on more muscle. This is the guy who invented the OsteoStrong. You can see he looks like a beast. He's using a device he calls the X3 bar. It's a variable resistance. It's a very heavy-duty latex banding system. But this is just kind of a picture for resistance training. So we'll start with resistance training being the key. Without resistance training, you're not necessarily going to be able to build enough muscle for you to maintain metabolic flexibility as you age. So there's two main things that build muscle. There's resistance training or strength training, and then there's protein loading, which we'll talk about. We'll first start with the resistance training. So I'm not an exercise physiologist, so this is just from personal experience, but you're generally going to need resistance training 2 to 3 times a week, and maybe 20, 30 minutes. So go to your local YMCA or gym and just work with a trainer if you don't know how to use the equipment, and get a program designed. And just do big compound exercises. So squats are excellent. These are kind of a little bit more for show, tricep push downs and bicep uh, like extensions, and then like a bench press. That may be not as much necessary, um, but anything you do to stimulate your muscles is going to be key to longevity. Then transition a little bit. We'll talk about heart rate variability in one moment, but cut back a little bit to the the cardio. So cardio is important. I don't want to minimize it, but going out there and running 8-minute miles for 20 miles straight is not physiologic. Your heart isn't meant to be like a metronome. It's supposed to have variability. So as you breathe in, your heart expands. You breathe out, it contracts. There's a difference in the beat to beat variability. The more variability, the better trained you are. The less heart rate variability, two things. One, maybe something serious going on with your heart and you need to get checked out. But two, it can also be a marker of overtraining. So if you're exercising, multiple times a day or for long periods of time and you don't give your body enough time to recover, we've previously weeks talked about how to optimally sleep. If you don't sleep well and you keep exercising, potentially you can do more damage than good by continuing to exercise that much. So I typically recommend, if you're, reasonably fit and don't have a lot of orthopedic issues that you got to kind of work around, interval training is probably more optimal for cardiovascular conditioning for people. So interval training is when you push yourself hard for 10, 15, 20 seconds, and then you slow down for, usually a multiple 3 to 4 times that period. If you have a chest strap, you can actually measure what your heart rate peak is, and then you want to get back down to about 70% of your peak and then push it hard again. But usually interval training is only going to take 14, maybe 20 minutes max. So you can get, the same benefit from interval training, actually more benefit doing 15, 20 minutes of interval training than doing an hour on a treadmill or elliptical or bike. So we'll go over the heart rate variability. And I mentioned it before, like if you have high heart rate variability, you're pretty much good to go. You're not that physiologically stressed, your autonomic nervous system's in balance, you're not sympathetically driven, that fight or flight response has cooled down, and you're ready to perform. If you have lower HRV, your body's more stressed, you probably want to take a kind of deload day or recovery day. So there are different devices which you can use to measure your heart rate variability. There's different Bluetooth enabled chest straps. Polar makes a couple, and then there's a couple of different companies that make the kind of a wrist strap. I got a Zoom one. I know that the newer Apple Watches potentially also do some heart rate variability, but you want to measure your heart rate variability likely first thing in the morning. You get a couple of baselines and see what your number is. If your number is lower than your baseline, that's probably a day you don't want to push it as hard. So these two gentlemen both were number one in their respective fields for many years, but Tiger Woods tended to break down a lot more than Federer did in his career. Woods had multiple spine issues and was out of the game for over a year for a while. But Woods never really prioritized recovery. He had horrific sleep habits. He'd wake up in the middle of the night, go run a 5K, go lift weights, and he just beat his body up, burning the candle at both ends, kind of an analogy. The Federer is, reported to sleep up to, 9, 10 hours a night and definitely prioritizes recovery. And he's had a long career and is still playing. I know Woods is still playing, but Woods isn't, nearly the player he was when he was in his prime. So what do you do for recovery other than, like we talked about a couple of weeks ago, is how to optimally sleep? A couple other things you can do. You can do LLT or PBM. LLT is the original term for the most part, called low-level laser therapy. It can also be known as low-level light therapy. It can be done with an LED bed. It doesn't have to be a laser. And then PBM is usually more commonly used now, and that stands for photobiomodulation. Photo, light, biology, modulation, changing something. So there's different people who make these red light devices. There definitely is a quality difference between them. So, I'm, obviously lit up red right now. I'm using an EMR Tech box just as a room illuminator, but it's a photobiomodulation device. But typically, you get what you pay for those with those devices, and the bigger the panels, the more they cost. So this is probably, in this picture is probably a Juve that this guy's got set up. You know, if you get one of these full body panels from Juve, it's going to be, you know, multi-thousands of dollars to kind of recreate what this guy has. You can get a, you know, 1 foot by 1 foot box for maybe, you know, $300-400. So I typically recommend people start with the smaller devices and then work their way up if they really want to treat less areas. But the way the red light therapies work is that it stimulates the mitochondria without you having to put food into it to stimulate it. So it essentially will make ATP in the mitochondria. But the red light is also very anti-inflammatory, so it'll decrease swelling and pain wherever it hurts. So if you tweak your shoulder or knee when you're exercising, you put that in front of one of these boxes for about 20 minutes, and you're going to notice that the muscle soreness definitely decreases faster than it would be if you didn't use it. You know, there's other benefits for it. So, you know, it does help stimulate collagen. So it will potentially, if you use it routinely enough on your face, you'll have less wrinkles. So photobiotimodulation is definitely in the biohacker world very common, but more and more health spas and such are starting to even have some of the red light boxes you can use. The next trick I'm going to show you is more of a for advanced people only. I don't necessarily recommend people try to do this for, you know, exercise recovery, but you know, if you want to take photobiomodulation to the next step, then you do it intravenous. So this is me doing a intravenous red light laser a couple weeks ago using a Weber Endo laser. It's a device made in Germany. The red light will directly stimulate the red blood cells, so you're going to get a better boost doing it intravenous. But obviously, this is invasive. It's going to be more expensive than getting a photobiomodulation box to stand in front of. But I show this because it looks awesome. You can see my arm. I got this, you know, glowing red light. But it actually is interesting is that the Russians are the ones that found a lot of this data, how intravenous photobiomodulation actually works. But if you actually watch the Olympics for the past, you know, 10, 15 years, when the Russians do real well, a lot of times they were using these type of therapies, these intravenous lasers, and they're light doping. So it's really hard to prove that people were doing this unless they had IV tracks. But you know, doing it an IV laser, this is on the like the Olympics ban list for doping. So you can't do this if you're a pro athlete. If you're a weekend warrior, well, maybe. But the other thing that can help with recovery is cold therapy. I know we've talked about this a little bit before. This is just a picture of Dave Asprey in a cryo chamber. You know, cryo works a little bit, but I think for most parts it's kind of gimmicky. You know, it's 3 minutes in, you know, cooled air. Liquid nitrogen is like -140. You know, air is about 24 times less transmitting of cold therapy than water. So it works. In your outer skin, it gets cold. And you do feel good for a little while, but does it truly, you know, decrease muscle pain and soreness over time? My experience, maybe not so much. So, yeah, you can try it if you like, and I've done it a few times, and I think it's interesting to do. But you know, I wouldn't routinely do it to try to recover from exercise. If I really was going to do something, I would do more like Michael Phelps is doing, or the guy above, that's Wim Hof, the Iceman, is, you know, submerge yourself in cold water. You're not going to do this in the first day, so you got to work your way up to this, and you know, maybe you just dial it into, you know, you're in a warm bath and just keep making it cooler and cooler and you get too cold. You're not going to jump in ice unless you're trained up to know how to do it. But that's one of the theories that why Phelps was as good as he was swimming in like 55-degree water. When you get cold adapted, your mitochondria work more efficiently. They make energy more effectively. So he was cold adapted, swimming in warm waters when he was racing, and that's why he was, you know, as good as he was. Yes, he was genetically very gifted, but he trained very well for what his mitochondria allowed him to do. So that's kind of my overview of kind of optimal exercise. I know many of you have seen me in the office or previously seen me in the office. My current website is apollocardiology.com. I'm mostly on Instagram at Dr. Twyman. That's where I put most of my biohacks and usual health tips. And for the professionals, I'm on LinkedIn. That's kind of where I find more of my executives and fire chiefs and people I go out to give talks to in the community. So I'll stop the share here, and then I'll open it up to questions here. So, and then I'll also turn it so that you guys could unmute yourself if you wanted to unmute yourself and ask a question live, or you can type it in the chat box and we'll go from there. All right. Well, while waiting for the questions again, I did mention I was going to talk about another way you can build muscle is protein uh, timing. So, muscle protein synthesis is just a fancy term for how do you build muscle. As you age, you become more anabolic resistant, so your body can't make as much muscle. And your muscle is your metabolic currency. Without muscle, you don't tend to do well. So your muscle burns your sugar for energy. It also burns fat for energy. And I have a personal example. A family member a couple months ago was very sick, ended up in the ICU on a ventilator for a couple days. But this person was very fit before they got sick with this illness, but they lost 12 pounds of muscle during that hospitalization. Fortunately, they had 12 pounds of muscle to give away, but that muscle is basically your metabolic bank. You break down amino acids in the bank and you repair the damage of what was going on. So without that muscle, that person wouldn't have recovered nearly as fast as they did. So this is why sarcopenia, or losing muscle mass as your age, is so devastating. If you end up sick, you don't have the building blocks to repair yourself. And resistance training is key. When you're in your 20s, you don't have to do as much because your hormones work as well. But as you're 40, 50, 60 years old, you need to do more to maintain that muscle mass. So resistance training is key, but also getting enough protein to feed the muscle essentially. Not that simple, but the kind of the simple concepts work sometimes. But you need at least 90 grams of protein a day to stimulate muscles building. So breaking it up 30 grams 3 times a day is the bare minimum. If you're really jumping on more muscle, you're probably using a gram per pound of body weight, of ideal body weight for the most part. So I'm, my current body weight is about 155 pounds. If I was trying to put on a lot of muscle, I'd probably be up to about 155 grams of protein a day. And just for reference, about a palm of your hand, size of meat is generally going to be about 30 grams of protein. So, all right, so we talked a little about protein. So, all right, still don't see any questions coming in yet, but if people want to ask something, they can unmute themselves and talk or type it in the chat box. All right. All right. Well, looks like somebody's wanting to try to chat, so. All right, so your last digits are 16. You're open. All right. If you don't have a question, I'm gonna put you back on mute for now. Just discuss the benefits of lightweight training. So, lightweight training is good to kind of maintain muscle mass, but you need to do heavy weights to actually build muscle mass. You're gonna have to work around any type of orthopedic, limitations, obviously, but heavy weightlifting or some type of, like that X3 band where you have heavy resistance bands, because lifting actual heavy weights, there's a little bit of a downfall because, for example, on a bench press, examples say if you had 100 pounds on the bar, you could push up 100 pounds, but when you're all the way at full extension, you could actually resist 300 pounds coming back down. But because you couldn't push 300 pounds off your chest, you can only bench press 100 pounds. So there's a lot of inefficiencies in using traditional weight machines. So using variable resistance, you can kind of get a fuller range of motion. And so yes, you start at lightweight, but by the time you're pushing at full extension, it's at a heavy weight. So that's one way to get around it. And it's typically less stress on your joints to do it that way. So we're waiting for any questions to come in. So if anybody new, we do record these. I'll post it up in the Facebook group by tomorrow morning. Sometimes it takes about an hour for it to kind of convert and get uploaded, but it will be out there. If there's not any questions on exercise stuff, I'll open it up to general questions if you want. So working out with a heart rate monitor, it's generally encouraged. The chest straps tend to be more sensitive than the wrist ones, just by my own personal experience. So the heart rate monitors on the machines where you kind of grasp, they sort of work, but typically if you get high enough in your heart rate, they're not all that accurate. So I typically recommend like the Bluetooth enabled chest straps. And depending on what your current physical conditioning is, will guide on how high your peak heart rate should be. I mean, to get a true maximum, you would do a exercise stress test in a supervised situation, or a medical situation, or you'd work out with a trainer, and then they would push you as hard as you could on a treadmill, see what your peak heart rate is, and then design a heart rate zone for you. So, for example, when we do a stress test, we kind of figure out, and it's a very rough estimate, it's 220 minus your age. It's not a very good estimate because it's not sensitive, but gives you an idea where to start. And then on a stress test, we only push people to at least 85% of their maximum. I always let them go as long as they want to go, or until I tire them out. But then when they get a peak heart rate, then I can tell them, okay, you never need to really push it harder than 70% of this heart rate to get the cardiovascular benefit. You can go faster if you need to for a race, or you got to get away from something, but you don't need to go faster for metabolic efficiency or metabolic health reason. But the heart rate monitors are good to work out with, and most of them, if you get the apps, there's free ones. I think I use the Elite HRV. You can sync your heart rate monitor to that, and then you can actually do the heart rate variability testing as well. All right, well, we might be wrapping up a little bit early tonight, which is fine. I'll upload this to the group later tonight, and then next week we'll be chatting about how to interpret your own lab work. That way it makes it a little bit easier for you when you come to see me, or if you go to other doctors, you already know what you're getting yourself into. So, all right. Well, I thank everybody for joining us tonight, and have a great evening. And if you need anything, just send me a comment or a message in Facebook. So have a great night, guys.